Hi everybody, this is Ella with the Cake Eccentric, and I want to lead you through a really easy way to make roses using fondant. So the first thing we're going to do is actually color this fondant. It's already kind of a pink color, but I want to show you how easy it is to dye fondant. So I'm going to use a gel-based food coloring. You can find this in most craft stores and culinary stores, and you're just going to use a toothpick to wipe a little color on there and begin to knead. And you don't want to use the traditional liquidy food coloring that you might find in your grocery store. And if you're really hoping to achieve a deep color, a dark blue or red, I would recommend that you wear gloves as you begin to knead this. So it's important when you're using fondant that you get it nice and warm and malleable in your hands. And keep in mind a few things. First of all, fondant is a sugar dough. It's made by boiling sugar to really high temperatures, and the sugar is eventually gradually cooled. And as it cools, it's folded or kneaded. And the word fondant is actually a French word. It comes from the French verb fondre, to fold, hence where it gets its name from. And traditional bakery fondant is actually kind of difficult to make, and it's preferable that you have some culinary training before you attempt it at home. Therefore, it's easiest to just buy fondant in the craft store, in the baking aisle, or the culinary store that you go to for specialty equipment. You can also find it online. Or if you really want to do it yourself, you can make a version of fondant with marshmallows, and it's very simple. You melt marshmallows and you add some confectioner's sugar and you knead it until it becomes a dough. In fact, most people actually prefer the taste of marshmallow fondant to store-bought fondant. So go ahead and check out that recipe on my blog if you're interested in trying out your own fondant. So now we're looking at this piece that I have here, and it's a nice deep shade of pink. And we can get started making our fondant rose. So just break off a little piece of fondant, and you want to roll it in your hands and make it into a ball. Now the fondant that you're going to set aside and use eventually, make sure you're covering this with some sort of saran wrap or with a plastic bag. Fondant dries as it's exposed to air, which is ideal when you're done with a flour and you want it to dry and harden so that you can use it on your cakes. But you don't want it to dry out while you're using it, because once it dries out completely, you really can't do anything with it. You can't, warm it back up. It just isn't workable anymore. So, roll your piece of fondant into a little ball. And this is about a ½ inch in diameter. The roses we're going to make today aren't going to be that big, but they'll be really nice design to put on a cake. And now just begin flattening it with your fingertips. And you want to aim to just flatten out these edges gradually as you go around. And another thing that you want to know about fondant is that it does get sticky, and you might even see it kind of adhering to my fingertips as I'm using it. If this is happening while you're using it, you want to use a solid vegetable shortening like Crisco or anything that you find in the store, and you can just put a little bit of it on your fingers or even knead it into the fondant that you're using, and it will keep the fondant from sticking to your fingertips. If you're rolling out fondant to cover a cake, you can use Crisco as well, or vegetable shortening, or you can use a combination of cornstarch and powdered sugar to dust your surfaces, much like you might when you're making a pie crust with flour, and that will keep your fondant from sticking. So as you can see, I really flattened out these edges, and you got a little hole there, but this is kind of petal shaped, and I want you to think about the shape of a rose petal as you're flattening out these pieces. They're kind of circular and round, but not, perfect by any means. So just take this edge here, and you want to just kind of curl it in and start to roll it. And you want the edges to all kind of line up here, and just roll it along. And you can kind of see it's beginning to look a little bit like a rosebud. And about halfway down the flower, just pinch off this extra. And you're going to use this fondant in just a second to start creating petals. So there's your beginning of your rosebud. And make sure it's nice and rounded on the bottom. Now, take that extra piece that we just ripped off, and if you don't have a lot, you can add just a little bit more fondant to it. Roll it into a ball like we did just a minute ago. and begin to flatten it out with your fingertips once more. And just going around, and again, you're making kind of a circular shape, a round shape, and you're kind of trying to replicate the shape of a real rose petal. And again, the key here is to make your edges of the fondant really thin, and that will make your design look a little more intricate. And again, you can see it's petal shaped and it's round, but it's certainly not a perfect circle or a square even. So you're going to take your rosebud again, and you're just going to take your piece of fondant and just roll it along the side, gently adhering it, sticking it to that bud that you made. And you might notice that your fondant just is already kind of sticky and they stick together, and it's perfect. If you have any kind of trouble keeping your petals stuck onto the base, use a little bit of water and a paintbrush, and that will allow the fondant to stick to itself. So let's make another petal. We're going to take a little bit more fondant, again about 1/2 inch in diameter ball, and just keep flattening. Now you can add lots of petals to your rose and make it a very full kind of bloomed design, or you can just add a few petals and make it like a small rosebud. And using a combination of either of these on a cake would really be a beautiful design. And don't worry if you get little holes in the middle of your fondant. Again, they don't have to be perfect. Just get those edges nice and thin. And you can see how they kind of start to ruffle naturally. And one more time, you're just going to wrap it around and start to furl out that edge so that the flower begins to look like it's blooming. And again, you're going to squeeze off the extra. Now, like I said, you can add as many petals as you really want. If this is enough petals for you, a little partially bloomed flower, you can place it on a toothpick and just insert this into some styrofoam and let it dry completely. You can put it right on a cake if you want. You can pipe leaves around it with frosting. And these are just a really easy design to put on a cake or a cupcake or anything that you're making. These are really popular with little girls, and it's actually very simple. This is a really simple exercise for kids to do, and they tend to have the dexterity to pull it off. So I encourage you to do this with some of your family members on a rainy day. And that's it. So thank you for joining me once again at the Cake Eccentric, and I will see you soon.